G'day mate, 40 here. So just reading an article in New York Times. Molly Jong fast. Right, she is the daughter of Erica Jong, and here's the article. Right, how Molly Jong fast tweeted her way to stardom. And I interviewed her back in 2004. I was doing a whole series of interviews on American Jewish literature, and she was one of the Jewish novelists that I interviewed. So why has Molly Jong fast been able to tweet her way to stardom? And why have, say, Kyrie Irving and Kanye West gotten into a ton of trouble recently? And a lot of it simply has to do with likability. Like, Molly Jong fast is incredibly likable. Like, she's incredibly open about her struggles with addiction. And I knew she was a lefty when I interviewed her, and she knew I was on the right. But she was just incredibly charming and pleasant and fun to talk to. And people like Kyrie Irving and Kanye West, they're just not very nice. Not just very fun. Not exactly fun to talk to. Right? They're difficult people. Molly Jong Young, not such a difficult person. She's very easy to get along with. And so people like easy. So how Molly Jong fast tweeted her way to liberal stardom. She wasn't a political expert, but her Trump-era angst found a following among Democrats, and even the White House is interested. So the story begins with her interviewing Vice President Kamala Harris. And she tells the owner of the New Republic, Win McCormack, "Oh, I just interviewed the Vice President." And McCormack replies, brow furrowing, "The Vice President of the United States?" So, Erica Jong fast, 44, she is perhaps best known for being the daughter of her mother, Erica Jong, who wrote the classic feminist novel, Fear of Flying. So, Molly Jong fast went into rehab at 19. She got married at age 23. She read a couple of novels, that's why I interviewed her. She read a book of essays about her Bohemia by way of Park Avenue upbringing. Now she's a liberal media star. So how did she do it? By being damn likable. So this week she joined Vanity Fair as a special correspondent. 1 million people follow her on Twitter. Her podcast is distributed by iHeartMedia. Her first guest was Ron Klain, President Joe Biden's chief of staff. She's interviewed all sorts of senators like Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer. She's interviewed Julia Louis-Dreyfus, John Fetterman, Kamala Harris. All right, she's interviewed people like MSNBC lineup. So her ascent is a little bit like the Woody Allen movie Purple Rose of Cairo, where a moviegoer steps into the screen and enters the world of her favorite film. So she marshaled her weapons-grade Twitter habit and her networking ability. She'd just slide into journalist DMs, and she's become a star of left-wing media. She's an MSNBC mom who appears on MSNBC. So part of it, in the big picture, you say, oh, it's because of the growing importance of social media, but a darn lot of it is just that she's so likable. Like, you can be right-wing and enjoy a conversation with Molly Jong fast. Right? She is not pompous. And a lot of it is that professional punditry does not require unique, rare skills. Right? There's not a big difference between armchair pundits and professional pundits. Right? This is a woman who's likable and a great networker. She wins friends easily. She wears her privilege lightly. And she has incredible empathy and charm. And most people who rise to media stardom are pretty good at being charming. Like Richard Spencer is charming. Nick Fuentes, charming. Right? The power of likability. So Noah Shackman is now the editor of Rolling Stone. So Noah wrote 3 articles about me back in year 2000 and 2001. Now he's the editor of Rolling Stone. Like when he came to LA, we used to go to social gatherings together. I introduced him to Andrew Breitbart and a whole bunch of that crew. So now Noah Shachtman's done good. It's like there's this economics writer for the New York Times. I used to Adam, blanking on his name. I used to know him 20 years ago. Like, he introduced himself to me, showed me around. He's gone on to great success now with the New York Times, regular column, I think weekly, on the economy for the New York Times. So she's not adversarial, she's nice. So one big reason why Molly Jong-Fast is successful and Kyrie Irving and Kanye West are struggling is that Kanye and Kyrie are not very nice. And one key to likability is just Molly Jong-Fast is just incredibly open. Right? People, generally speaking, like people who are open and honest. Right? People like people who are willing to be vulnerable. People like people who open up. So she says, I was a drug addict, I nearly died, I got sober, I've had this incredible run. She's grateful. People like people who are grateful. So her grandparents include Howard Fast, the novelist of Spartacus fame and communist, who served prison time during the McCarthy era. And her mother, Erica Jong, was an early adopter of oversharing. So in 1985, Erica Jong moved 6-year-old Molly Jong into the Beverly Hilton for a month because Erica was developing a sitcom based on her daughter's experience with divorce. So Molly Jong's father, Jonathan Fast, sued Erica, his ex-wife, and demanded that the TV show change Molly's character's name from Molly to Megan. And a review in the New York Times praises the show's appealing breeziness. Molly Jong-Fast is dyslexic. She did poorly in school. She got kicked out of Dalton, this elite private school. It was like a seismic shock to her intellectual family. She got into alcohol and drugs. She spent time at Hazelden, the A-list rehab center, and then published a novel about her struggles. I just did what my mother did, she says. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. The reviews were vicious. She then married her husband, who was an English professor turned venture capitalist. She had 3 children. She wrote another book. Then Trump came down the escalator and it gave her life meaning, right? We're all looking for meaning in life. We all want to feel as though we matter, that we have significance. So Donald Trump came along and gave a ton of people meaning, whether they're pro or anti-Trump. So to be successful, it requires energy, and it's a lot easier to get energy if you feel that what you're doing is significant. And so Erica Jong felt like, the Republic is at risk. I need to tweet about my angst, and she hit a chord. She became incredibly successful.
I had a bit of an interesting experience last night. So it was probably 1 a.m. or so, and I was up too late, and I was about to go to bed, and I clicked on this. I was just looking at Twitter, and I clicked on this space that was being recommended to me, and it had 250 people in it or something, and I was just kind of curious, actually. And I think the title was something like "The Big Man Returns" or something. So I was curious, and then I realized immediately that it was Nick Fuentes, who has he has some secret account, or something. He's disobeying Twitter's policy by creating new accounts, and there were a lot of people in there, and it was only, by the time I realized that it was Nick Fuentes, in a matter of say 30 seconds or so, they were like, "Oh, Spencer's in the chat," or what, and they were like, "We got to get him out here," blah blah blah. And I was kind of hesitant to accept the request, but I did, and I was expecting a kind of blowtorch, treatment by Fuentes, and it was just going to be this acrimonious and useless kind of thing that I was going to hang up on because it's not worth my time. And I think Nick kind of got that a little bit. And it was weird. I had not spoken to Fuentes in quite some time. And
so they're both charming when they want to be, right? They didn't get to where they are by not being charming.
Everyone has a different persona. There's a certain public persona. There's a persona you might have with your parents, say. There's a persona you have with your child. There's a persona you have at work. There's a persona you have when you're watching a football game or something. But so we all...
And that's so important, right? We don't have just like this set personality. Certain traits where we're outgoing or we're tough or we're vicious or we're ultra competitive, right? These so-called, essential character traits that we have, right? They are domain specific. They're situation specific. Right? We all adopt different personas in different parts of life.
Put on a mask on some level, of course. But, I've heard this about Fuentes, and I heard this from other people, even people who dislike him intensely. And that is that if you ever can kind of get him off the online debate stage, he can actually be reasonable. And he is intelligent, but he can actually be thoughtful and reasonable and listen to you. And I have to say, I talked with him, I don't know, maybe it was 30 minutes, something like that. It wasn't a huge thing.
Right,
But
this isn't
I have
surprising.
to hand it to Fuentes. Now, granted, perhaps I'm going to change my mind immediately when he starts doing his usual tricks afterward. But the guy he's very reasonable. He's more self-aware than he lets on. I mean, I think one thing that we've all...
Okay, we all get in situations where we have to change our personalities, whether it's work or we're playing football or we're in some sort of contest. So this shouldn't be nearly as surprising as it seems to be for Richard. Of course he can be intelligent and charming. Of course he switches in and out of different personas, we all do.
All notices that kind of weird, manic persona where he's the only guy on screen, and he is playing this kind of weird Zoomer gamer / Midwestern talk radio host / video game playing edgelord. And it's, I don't know, I probably won't do an interpretation of it, but you know what I mean. There's this kind of manic quality to it where it's like, sorry guys, sorry, but if my lord is in hell, according to your religion, you have no place in America. Okay, goodbye, you gotta get out. All right, what are we thinking? There's a certain kind of mannerism, and there's a lot of picking up on Trumpisms. The use of we is something. There's actually a study in which leaders actually used I more than we, but with Trump, it's we. So it's you are part of a collective through me in a way. Like,
So pundits become successful by feeding an audience, right? Not by challenging an audience. Like Richard wants to develop an audience that wants to be challenged. But there's no money in that. There's no money in being right in your punditry. The money is in being interesting and in feeding an audience's desire to hear reasons for why what they believe and feel is true and good and better than the alternative.
We love McConnell, he is behind us all the way, or we hate Mitch McConnell, he is a rhino cunt. It's a kind of it's not a royal we exactly, it's kind of a presumed we where, you have political consciousness through an individual. He does that. But it's funny, maybe it was just the fact that he was actually kind of relaxed, and I was not attacking him, and it was actually good conversation. I think behind all of that craziness, there is someone who's actually intelligent, and I think maybe that's a little bit tragic about Nick. But the main thing I told him was, do you feel like you are being used? That was effectively what I asked him. And it was a leading question because obviously my assumption is that the answer is yes. And what I was referring to is like, you have these conservative institutions, the Women for Trump, say, that created the...
Of course he's being used. We're all being used, right? We're all being used and we're all using other people. So this isn't some giant revelation, right? We all try to use other people to meet our needs. Other people try to use us to meet their needs, of course.
That rented out the Ellipse actually during January 6th. And the whole apparatus of behind-the-scenes apparatus of Ali Alexander and Roger Stone and all of these crazies in Georgia and so on. And, they have money to some degree with Women for Trump or Women for America First, which was originally a Tea Party group. They have an institution, and so they have like a massive email list. They have a network.
So yeah, of course he's being used. Like, that shouldn't be so surprising, right? People just don't do nice things for us purely out of the goodness of their hearts, right? There are a whole lot of transactions going on, right? We're all using and being used. That's just the nature of reality, right? Your boss doesn't give you a paycheck just out of the goodness of his heart. He gives you a paycheck in exchange for services. Husbands and wives constantly doing things for each other. The man takes out the trash, the woman cleans the bathroom, and the man may bring home the majority of the income. So much of life is transactional. You can be subtler or you can be more obvious with it. That's the nature of reality. That's how the world works. You know what? I'm coming back here 1,000 times if I have to. We win, they lose. That's how the world works.
Talk about Kanye, West, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, the ADL, Ali Alexander, J6 insurrectionist, and more. And I'm going to circle around the topic of Christian anti-Semitism. And by that I mean...
So, listening to Richard Spencer here talk about Christian anti-Semitism. So, anti-Semitism is a fancy name for anti-Jewish or Jewish critical. And it's not an essential quality, right? There's no essential quality to being Jewish or to being Christian or to being white or being black or Aborigine, right? Qualities manifest differently in different circumstances. Wow, look at that enormous ship coming into harbor. Wow. So I'm here at Sydney Harbor and you can just see the outlines of the Sydney Opera House there in the distance. Okay, so just like it's Saudi money that's funding Elon Musk's free speech takeover of Twitter, right? So the Saudis are on the side of freedom, guys. Well, in this circumstance they are, but in other circumstances they're certainly on the side of repression, right? So no group is eternally on the side of repression, no group is eternally on the side of freedom, no group is eternally on the side of God or on what's right or what's wrong, all right? The side we're on depends upon circumstance.
Something very specific. So I'm sure that everyone listening to this has been exposed to what could probably be called, most accurately, casual anti-Semitism. These usually involve...
And so a lot of what's called casual anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism is simply that people tend to dislike and fear, even hate those who are different from them, right? Jews, just as high a proportion of Jews have fear and hatred and negative feelings towards non-Jews, right? Anti-Gentilism, as non-Jews have towards Jews, right? We all tend to have negative feelings towards those who are different, depending on the circumstance, right? Those feelings may be more or less intense, but may absolutely have nothing to do whatsoever with the intrinsic qualities of whatever group or individuals we see representing a certain group.
Involve Jews being good with money or tight with money or not great athletes or something like that. I can remember when I was growing up, there was a joke of how do you lose a Jewish cop? You take the toll road, badoom crash. The implication that Jews, are very tight with money and wouldn't chase you down the toll road.
We only have so much time, so much energy, so much mental processing power. And so to reduce all these variables, we put people into groups, all right? We don't see people, generally speaking, who we don't know. We don't see strangers as individuals, we see them as members of groups. And that's just how it is, and we tend to fear and loathe and dislike those who are different from us, right? Everybody hates a stranger, says Mark Twain, and Jews are everywhere a stranger. Even the angels.
These, in my mind, are the equivalent of, funny jokes about Italians or whatever, in the sense that they might be mean-spirited in some cases. They might also contain a kernel of truth, but at the end of the day, they're rather benign and maybe even rather meaningless. But Christian anti-Semitism is something different, and I do think it's something more profound. And as I said on Twitter, I think there's a kind of...
Of course it's going to be more profound because Christianity came from the Jews, all right? Why do people lose everything? and get punished for expressing Jewish sentiment, but everything derogatory can be said about white people without penalty. Why is that? Because Jews, number one, are much more effective at organizing in their own interests. Wow, I was just talking to a family member and they talked about my chubby cheeks. When I went to synagogue here in Australia, they remembered me from a year ago and they said, wow, you put on weight. So yeah, Jews are more effective at organizing in their own interests than white people are. Right? That's your answer right there. Right? A lot of this organization requires discipline and expertise and funds and shaping of narratives. So some people are just more effective at shaping a narrative than other people.
Pathological ambivalence to it. There's inherent mixed feelings and contradiction to this.
Well, of course, Christians are going to have mixed feelings about Jews and Judaism because Christianity emerged out of Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. He came first to the Jews to try to get them to accept his message, and they, of all the peoples in the world, have been the most resistant to the claims that Christianity made for him. So, of course, there's going to be ambivalence. Christianity took on the Jewish scriptures, though, of course, nobody believes that they're starting a new religion. Everybody just thinks that they're perfecting or fulfilling the existing religion. I mean, Muhammad had the same attitude towards Jews and Christians.
And so the Christian anti-Semite can say...
And question from the chat, Joseph says, do Jews ally with blacks against white people? Well, sometimes, all right, when Jews are part of the coalition of the fringe, because they fear the white Christian core, they might find some common interests with blacks, just like in other issues, Jews and whites may find common interest in supporting stronger law enforcement. So, generally speaking, politics in America revolves around a coalition of the fringe, right? Blacks, Jews, Latinos, Chinese, Japanese, homosexuals, kind of united against the white Christian core. And by and large, Jews, like Asians, have fit in with the coalition of the fringe. And the coalition of the fringe has almost nothing in common, right, except, fear and loathing of the white Christian core.
Some rather harsh stuff. Kanye West has talked about people in the media and people he's had relationships with in the recording industry.
So if you are Jew critical, you have to think that Kanye West would be your last choice as a spokesman, right? This is not a guy who tends to sound particularly rational or compelling. I would not want Kanye West articulating my point of view. I would not want Kanye West fighting for my people. I mean, I would cringe at that prospect.
As basically being a bunch of bastards. He can say some harsh things. But at the end of the day, I guess what's most telling about his anti-Semitism is that he considers himself to be a Jew. And by being a Christian with the blood of Christ, he is a Jew.
So my father, the preacher man, he would always talk about how Christians are the real Jews. And the Jews that we have today are not the real Jews. So many people who are anti the current crop of Jews still want to tie into the ancient lineage of Israel that goes back to the Hebrew Bible. So Kanye, my father, and hundreds of millions of other Christians are in the same camp.
So that kind of seeming contradiction, I think, gets at the heart of this deep ambivalence.
We're all ambivalent and contradictory. Like, one day we hate our boss, the next day we love our boss. One day we hate our co-worker, the next day we love our co-worker. Like, we're all filled with contradictory feelings and thoughts going in many different directions. We need a WASP or Anglo-Saxon organization for protection for our rights. If we don't have that, we're going to lose, says Joseph. Yeah, so you would think that would be the Anglican Church. Like, why doesn't the Anglican Church serve as an organizing principle and organization for Anglos around the world? Why doesn't the Anglican Church unite the world's Anglo-Saxon tribes and make them a coherent civilization once again, perhaps under the reign of a philosopher king like King Charles? Will he do the trick?
Jesus came to fulfill the laws of Moses. That is...
Right, that's a text in the Gospels, all right? So one text does not a theological truth make, right? So Christianity quickly jettisoned most Torah laws. Now, Jesus was observant of Torah law, but Christianity has never been about observing the ritual laws of the Torah, which are 95% of the laws of the Torah.
Is the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. He did not come to cancel the Jewish scriptures, even though he did break some of the Jewish laws.
Well, every new religion that comes along thinks that they're fulfilling the existing religion that they're a part of. So this isn't new or unique
in his practice, and also is notable for stressing grace and forgiveness above adherence to laws. So
there are plenty of segments and parts of Judaism that stress grace and forgiveness above, adherence to law. So that's not a unique, brand new insight from Jesus. So from my Jewish perspective, everything Jesus said that was true is not new, and everything he said that was new is not true.
So Jesus, even when he was raging against the Pharisees, even when he was seemingly contradicting Judaism, was ultimately a Jew and ultimately fulfilling.
So Jews are known for verbal disputes, right? Jews are known for being a difficult and challenging people. So Jews are constantly disputing within each other, right? So Jesus was part of this intra-Jewish dialogue. And then from my perspective and from a secular perspective on Christianity, then the Apostle Paul came along and had these visions and completely transformed Jesus into, the Christ, who is part of a triune Godhead, comes to earth to save people from sin, as long as they believe in him and partake in a pseudo-cannibalistic ritual of drinking the blood and eating the flesh.
Judaism. Very similar to Kanye, who in his anti-Semitic quote-unquote outburst is ultimately declaring himself to be a Jew and declaring...
Yeah, if Kanye's outburst was anti-Semitic, then anti-Semitic is a pretty weak thing. All right, Kanye's outbursts were pretty weak tea. Right, they're not exactly imperiling the lives of thousands of Jews around the world.
Declaring Jews as, so to speak, pointing towards Christ. So this is the profound ambivalence that I think really should be taken seriously, because you hear a lot of, shrill shrieking in the media of, anti-Semitism is on the rise again, it's everywhere, and these mainstream figures like Kanye West.
And how do you get, statements like anti-Semitism is on the rise again? Because there's no objective definition of it, all right? Just the most normal human reactions to people who are different suddenly gets classified as anti-Semitism. So how bad is the wind? How bad is the wind affecting the audio quality?
West or Kyrie Irving are being anti-Semitic. What are we going to do? Next thing you know, the Third Reich is going to come back again. Well, look, that's overstated to begin with. But again, I would stress that what we're seeing right now is not mere Jew hatred. It's something deeper and something more contradictory, and it is.
So you don't hate those who you think are below you, right? You only hate those who threaten you. So people who don't have any interactions with Jews are much less likely to have negative feelings about them. So for example, in Australia, you'll find the most concentrated anti-Jewish attitudes in Sydney and in Melbourne, where people are most likely to encounter Jews. So apparently Richard Spencer's not coming across too clearly.
In the minds of the people saying these things, an attempt to redeem the Jews. So let me look at this a little more specifically in this ADL Kanye West controversy that is happening. And
all right, so why do Jews support immigration, right, into majority white European countries, but protect Israel against this? Is this a divide and conquest plan and for Jewish interests? Well, the same Jews who oppose immigration into Israel, right, oppose immigration into America. So left-wing Ashkenazi Jews, right, they tend to be for open borders, whether it's for the Jewish state or for the American state or the Australian state. Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews and right-wing Jews tend to be opposed to immigration or open borders, anywhere, including for the Jewish state. So blessings here to Elliot Blatt. The whole gang is here.
And just a little Twitter and Telegram exchange that I think reveals all the fault lines in this dialectic. I recently was called out by the chief of the ADL. I was connected with Kanye West as spreading sludge on Twitter. So we'll see if I'm a sacrificial lamb, as it were, in Elon Musk's stated attempt to protect free speech. Anyway, I hope I'm not. But Max Blumenthal, I've known about Max Blumenthal for quite some time. I actually first encountered him, a decade ago or more, when he was mostly targeting the religious right and conservatives. I remember some of these cringe compilation videos that he would make when he would go to CPAC and he would interview Christian nationalist or Christian Zionist, and they would say things like, we love Israel, they have our steadfast support, and then he'd push them a little further and they would talk about the end times, and it effectively, I don't know how many it is, but 100,000 Jews.
So Max Blumenthal is an interesting character, right? He's a bloke of the left, but he makes interesting videos. He raises, provocative points. He deals with a lot of stuff that the mainstream media doesn't want to deal with. So, kudos to Max for the good work that he does. I'm not aware of everything he does, but I certainly found those videos of his that I've paid attention to are thought-provoking.
Converting to Christianity and the rest of them going up into flames, something like this. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really go in for his stuff, but there was something interesting about it. That's how I learned about Max Blumenthal. Over the past, say, 4 years, he's joined the Gray Zone, or perhaps a co-founder, editor of the Gray Zone, and he's most notable for becoming a Russian shill, which is a surprising choice, surprising trajectory that I never would have guessed. Anyway, he was saying something that was critical, but also, pretty true about the situation of the ADL right now as being the Anti-Defamation League that is protecting Jews from...
So Russian shill, that's an interesting designation. So, what makes a Russian shill? So often a Russian shill is simply someone who opposes the Biden administration's, headlong rush into a massive conflict in Europe, risking nuclear exchange with Russia, risking World War III. So anyone who's critical of the tens of billions of dollars that we're funneling towards Ukraine, suddenly they become known as Russian shills. Right? It's just a put down. Right? It doesn't refer to some essential quality that you're just always pro-Russia. Right? People are pro-Russia in certain contexts, particularly when they oppose the subsidizing and escalating of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Right? So plenty of people get called Russian shills, without without being Russian shills. They're simply opposed to heading into World War III. They want to exercise some cognitive empathy towards whatever Putin's doing. Right? And so, like Jewish shills, Christian shills, conservative shills, right? They're often just in a certain situation. They're standing up for a particular point of view or interest. It's not an eternal quality. It's not an essential quality. They're just, always pro-Russian or pro-Jewish.
Slander and libel and all that kind of stuff. This is according to Max Blumenthal. We white American Jews are living through a golden age of power, affluence, and safety. Acceptance of this welcome reality threatens the entire Zionist enterprise.
Well, it's true that American Jews are in a golden age. Right? Things are really good for Jews in America. Jews are like the safest they've ever been. Now, that doesn't threaten the Zionist enterprise. The Zionist enterprise simply asserts that Jews, like every other people in the world, have a right to their own homeland, where they can set the agenda, where they can have their own laws, where they can operate a culture and a civilization the way that they want to without the veto power of non-Jews. So why should Jews, of all the people in the world, not be allowed their own homeland? And unless you've got a good answer to that, then I don't see how you can be anti-Zionist. And Jewish success in America or in England or in Australia does nothing to threaten the Zionist enterprise. The Zionist enterprise is not primarily about finding and creating a safe space for Jews. Right? That can be a side effect, that can be a blessing, but its primary mission is to simply normalize the Jewish experience. Yeah, I remember when George W. Bush referred to Putin as Pooty, but innocent times. And also, the United States and Russia had more in common then. We had common interests. Russia was a lot weaker. Russia's become much more formidable under Putin, and therefore is more willing to assert its own interests. Also, the West has been steadily expanding NATO right up to the Russian border. Ukraine is de facto, right? This is a lesson here for Sonia Sotomayor. Ukraine has become de facto, not de jure, a member of NATO. So de facto means not in law, but effectively. De jure means in law. And so Ukraine is not de jure a member of NATO, but it is de facto a member of NATO. And so that obviously threatens, Russia's best interest. Why would it want, a hostile organization on its doorstep?
From lobby fronts like the ADL to the State of Israel. So Max Blumenthal is clearly anti-Zionist still, because Zionism relies on Jewish insecurity to justify.
So if you're left-wing, right, whether you're a left-wing Jew or a left-wing non-Jew, you're very likely to be anti-Zionist because Zionism is a form of ethnic nationalism. All right? If you're not down with ethnic nationalism, if you're a true man of the left who believes that the most fundamental dividers between people are not race or ethnicity, but they are economics, then you're going to be anti-ethno-nationalism. So Joseph says that European countries are being destroyed by multiculturalism. Well, your main argument is with your own people. Your own people have essentially signed on for the multicultural enterprise. And you have a few tribes around the world who are more resistant to the multicultural enterprise. So maybe there's something to be learnt from Jewish nationalism and other types of nationalism, and how can that be applied to European types of nationalism so that people can preserve their own cultures.
Itself. Well, I think there is a lot of truth to what he says. I think he's getting at a certain kind of ambivalence at the heart of the Zionist project, at least from.
So I don't think that Max Blumenthal is a self-hating Jew. I don't like that term. I don't use it. Right? You're not a self-hating Jew if you're opposed to Zionism. Right? He's simply a true man of the left. He has left-wing values that are of greater importance to him than his ethnic values as a Jew. Right? So that doesn't make him self-hating, doesn't make him loathsome, doesn't make him a bad person. Right? He simply values other things more important than ethnic solidarity, ethnic unity, group interests. Right? So plenty of left-wing Jews, if they are more left-wing than they're Jewish, then yeah, of course, they're going to be opposed to Zionism, which is another form of ethnic nationalism.
The Jewish standpoint. And also from the Christian standpoint. I might want to go into this, actually. So, I mean, on the one hand, groups like the ADL want to fight anti-Semitism and call it out, apparently with the intention that one day it will end. One day.
So what does the Anti-Defamation League and liberals in general have in common? What do they have in common? They're both on eternal missions to educate. So the right looks around and the greatest threat that we see is disorder and contagion. But from a liberal and left-wing perspective, the greatest threat to our well-being is ignorance and attachments to traditional folkways and not becoming modern and rejecting the Enlightenment. Right? From a liberal perspective, those are the greatest threats. So also what motivates the Anti-Defamation League is fundraising, power, influence. Right? Most people want more power rather than less. Most people would prefer more money rather than less. And so by agitating about anti-Semitism, the Anti-Defamation League gets to increase its own importance, it gets to increase its own fundraising, and it gets to give purpose and meaning to secular Jewish lives. So Orthodox Jews, by and large, don't care about anti-Semitism because there's no mitzvah in the Torah about combating anti-Semitism. Right? Orthodox Jews are so busy fulfilling the 613 commandments of the Torah, they don't have time or interest, generally speaking, to fight against anti-Semitism. But if you're not living a life revolving around Torah observance, study of Torah, keeping the Sabbath, the kosher laws, laws of Taharat Mishpacha, the laws of family purity, then you need something to fill up that emptiness beyond the pursuit of pleasure. Like, people want to feel significant, right? One of our deepest fears is feeling insignificant. And so when you attach yourself to a cause that you feel is eternal and transcendent, such as combating bigotry, then, right, you've got significance. everybody wants to feel significant. We all, sign on to various causes and ideologies and groups to keep those latent feelings of insignificance at bay. Some of us even make live streams.
There will be no more anti-Semitism. Jews will be just like Presbyterians or Methodists. It will just be another religious denomination, and any criticism of Judaism itself will be much like a Presbyterian might criticize the Catholic dogma or something like that. Maybe he doesn't even want that, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But on the other hand, Zionism relies on anti-Semitism in a way for its justification. Now, this is not...
Okay, that's not true. All right, Zionism simply means that Jews deserve a state just like any other people. That Jews deserve a place where they can develop their own civilization and culture without the non-Jews having veto power over them. Like, why would you deny Jews, out of all the people in the world, the ability to have their own state? What do I think will be the outcome of the Kanye thing? I think he's in a lot of trouble, and I don't see him coming back from this very effectively unless he does what Jews call tshuva, unless he makes some dramatic repentance. Yeah, we want to feel significant. We want to go where everyone knows our name, and they're always glad we came. We want to know where people are. People are all the same. We want to go where everyone knows our name. So I don't see this ending well for Kanye West or Kyrie Irving or anyone who is saying publicly Jewish critical things. Because if you're a celebrity or you're a famous person in America, there's just going to be unbearable media and elite pressure against you if you're publicly saying anti-Jewish things. It's the third rail. It's the most hot button issue because you have the most effective organized resistance against you.
Completely accurate when you think about the history of Zionism in the state of Israel. But in terms of the way that it's legitimized first as we're just a little democratic liberal state in the Middle East and we deserve your support, but also we are the last refuge for when anti-Semitism rears its head again. We are the one last escape from the next Hitler, and this is why Israel should always exist. So in that sense, it justifies itself on the existence of anti-Semitism. It needs anti-Semitism. It needs, even, you could say, and I think Max Blumenthal is saying this, a kind of schizophrenia on the part of Jews, that where they see...
Okay, I think he's overstating it. Yeah, there are certainly lots of advantages to an in-group identity where you feel persecuted, where you can kind of team up and unite around your fear and loathing of the outsider. Right? That's good for any in-group identity. If it's paranoia, right, if it's completely detached from reality, then that comes with an enormous price as well. So I don't think Jewish existence or the existence of the Jewish state depends upon whipping up paranoia about how, the Cossacks are coming to get you.
See anti-Semitism everywhere. After all, more anti-Semitism, more justification for Israel. That's what I think Blumenthal is getting at. I don't know if Candace is getting at this. And she affirmatively retweets Max Blumenthal, says, "You were about to get into a lot of trouble for stating this. Reminds me of when I said something similar about the NAACP and BLM way back when. When you disrupt the trauma economy and call out the not-for-profits that benefit from it, you become their next target." I would give Candace some credit for this. And I think, if we're to be charitable to Kanye West, that is, try to represent what he's saying in the best possible light and not just, focus on the kind of contradictions and strangeness.
So trauma economy, that's brand new. I don't think we had such a thing as the trauma economy 50, 60, 70 years ago. Right now it's become a big thing where trauma becomes a whole economy. It's a whole new concept. It's like in the traditional Jewish outlook, that there's no such category as trauma, right? For example, if you were molested, right, it wasn't expected to be something that would forever ruin your life, right? So trauma comes from the secular worldview, where psychology has more importance, right? It's the importation of non-Jewish values. Really don't understand what Kyrie did that was so bad. All he did was post a link to a book that Amazon hosts, right? It's still up. People are watching and buying the documentary and the book. So yeah, it strikes me as a huge overreaction. But Kyrie Irving, I just saw a remark from a journalist that Kyrie Irving was one of his 5 least favorite people in the NBA. I don't think Kyrie Irving's made a lot of friends in the news media, right? He's not someone that journalists like. And so I think part of the piling on against Kyrie Irving is that journalists just don't like this guy. And so journalists will give a lot of slack to people that they like, but they're very happy to pile on to people that they don't like. And I think a lot of this piling on against Kyrie Irving just simply means journalists don't like this guy. Right? He's not very popular. He hasn't made many friends among the journos. And so they're happy to see him go down. Also, there's probably resentment that, this guy's making $30 million a year. And there's also probably a lot of journalist resentment that Kyrie Irving refused to get vaccinated. And so sports journalists, more so than other journalists, tend to uniformly be on the left. So north of 95% of sports journalists are on the left. So they're particularly dedicated to denying, human biodiversity. They have a very strong left-wing agenda. And I think they just welcome this opportunity to pile on to Kyrie Irving. Yeah, all he did was, tweet to a documentary that Amazon hosts. You'd think, why is that such a big deal? And so I think part of it's just overreaction. Part of it is people just don't like Kyrie Irving. And I think a normal person seeing all the pile-on against Kyrie is going to think, I feel sorry for this guy. What did he do that was so wrong? He just posted one link to a documentary that's good enough to be on Amazon.
I do hear a lot of this. In that interview with Lex Friedman, I actually listened to a little bit more of it last night while I was going to bed. But Kanye was saying, they create trauma. And so Disney creates trauma, even with a movie like Bambi, where Bambi's mom died. Oh, I remember seeing that in the theaters and crying, crying my eyes out. And what he's saying is that they almost need to traumatize you in order to fleece you, you could say. They place this trauma in your mind very early on, and then you kind of need to keep coming back to them. Now, maybe that's kind of taking it a bit too far, at least in the case of Bambi. But maybe it's not taking it too far in the case of BLM, that there needs to be this suggestion of widespread, rampant, vindictive, immoral attacks on the black race.
So yeah, I think there's something to that any group can ramp up its trauma story. And particularly if it's good at crafting narratives, if it has a larger role than average in culture, it can really light up the trauma narratives, and eventually outsiders start to resent it. Right? People don't want to be manipulated. So that's the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background. That's the Sydney Opera House. Why do Gentiles and others have to bow to Jews and their groups? Never see Jews bowing to any other group of people. We all bow to those who are more powerful than us. So Jews haven't always been powerful. When Jews lacked power and influence, then I assure you Gentiles were not bowing to them. Right now, Jews are disproportionately, compared to their numbers, successful in the United States, Australia, and Europe. And the natural human tendency is to bow towards people who are more successful than you are, and to expect other people to bow to you when you achieve great levels of success. All right, we all tend to be nice and respectful and to concede to those who are more powerful than us. So think you're walking down the street and there's just a narrow path and one person is going to have to give way to the other person. Right? The person who looks bigger and stronger, more formidable and more scary, right? He is much more likely to be acceded to. People are much more likely to, effectively give him the right of way. And so groups that are highly effective at organizing and punishing their enemies, all right, and who have disproportionate influence on the high grounds of culture, such as in the academy, in the professions, such as the legal profession, accounting, dentistry, medicine, law, right? Groups with tremendous power and the ability to organize and to punish their enemies, all right, they're going to naturally find outside groups learning from them and frequently deferring to them, right? So just like hypocrisy is the obeisance that vice pays to virtue, bowing is the obeisance that the less powerful pay to the more powerful. That's just the way the world works. I'm coming back here 100 times if I have to. We win. they lose. That's how the world works.
Race in America by the police, it generates this trauma or emphasizes things way out of proportion in order to fleece you, get your donations and so on. I think there's a lot of truth to that, actually. But what I want to get at is this is a response to all this stuff by Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro responded to Candace Owens, and he says, I think the ADL is a partisan hack organization too. But RTing Max Blumenthal, who spends his life covering for Jew haters and stumping for Israel's destruction, makes the conversation significantly worse. It's garbage. So Ben Shapiro is publicly calling out Candace. And he's done this a few times. He has publicly called out Candace, almost pretending like he doesn't work with her. He couldn't just, DM her or at the Daily Wire walk across.
Right, they both work together at the Daily Wire. So why do many right-wing Jews regard the Anti-Defamation League as no good? Because the Anti-Defamation League doesn't just fight ethnic defamation, they also have very much a left-wing agenda. But they never pose it as a left-wing agenda, just like liberals and leftists in general. Right? They don't pose as having an agenda. Right? They pose as simply being objective seekers of truth. Right? This is just what's objectively true. This is just what happens when you see the world openly and honestly, and you let go of your traditional prejudices and folk ways and your traditional medieval ways of thinking. So when you develop the modern notion of a buffered, autonomous, strategic, rational self who can make decisions and pursue rational ends and has natural inclinations towards goodness, right? You just take that as the only enlightened way to be. And anyone who opposes that, well, they must be primitives. And so liberals, by and large, don't believe that they're liberals, that they're just another group of partisans. Right? Liberals, by and large, think they're objective truth seekers, that they're the rational ones, that they are the products of enlightenment, and the rest of it just simply haven't caught up to their higher stakes.
Across the room and talk to her about these things. He needs to kind of signal about this and misrepresent Blumenthal. I'm no fan of Max Blumenthal overall, but I don't think he's a genocidal maniac. Interesting. So this goes a little further. So Candace responded to that. And someone sent me this from Telegram. So Ali Alexander is a really strange and, you could say, disreputable figure. I won't go into some of the rather horrifying rumors. They are rumors, I would say, but they seem to have some basis involving Karl Rove and so on. Google it if you must. He has been, I believe, convicted of a felony car theft or something like this. It's rather bad. Then again, if people turn their life around, if they do the crime and serve their time, they can re-enter society, and that's the way it should be. But yeah, still, there's a little whiff of being disreputable about him, and also just being simply a grifter. He benefited immensely from, no doubt, from the Stop the Steal movement. He was taking donations. He was out in front. He is a behind-the-scenes operative, and after January 6th, so there's a huge amount of pressure on him, he was pretty much going nuts. He's also been interviewed by the J6 committee. He's in the kind of mid-range of J6. So there's the low-hanging fruit, that is the people who invaded the Capitol and did all sorts of things. There's the high-hanging fruit, the Donald Trumps of the world, who kind of, on whose behalf this whole movement was based, but also someone who spurred it on and gave big speeches and promised to walk arm in arm with his comrades to the Capitol. And then there's the kind of mid-range, and that's where Ali Alexander is. He's kind of grifting off it. He's talking to congressmen, according to his own account. He's working with, Women for America First and this kind of stuff, who were renting places where these rallies took place. He is a mover and shaker, the one who's behind the scenes and not really a household name, like, say, Donald Trump or like the QAnon shaman. I don't believe he himself entered the Capitol, but he certainly greased the wheels. And he is also a very public Christian now, and all this kind of stuff. So our girl Candace Owens is, according to Ali, calling out her boss's ethnic victimhood theater tantrum. And he goes on.
So yeah, a lot of these people like Ali Alexander, Nick Fuentes, wrap themselves in Christianity, but you don't actually notice much that's particularly Christian in the way they live. So someone who's authentically Christian, they're going to have to sacrifice for their Christianity, right? It's going to shape their life. It's going to change the way they speak. It's going to limit the things that they can do. And so I think many people found it was disreputable to be alt-right, or to be an ethnic nationalist, or to be a magatard, and they're now wrapping themselves in Christianity as a more socially acceptable vehicle for their values. And their values are simply, every organism wants to create an environment where it is best suited for thriving. Now, we develop ideologies on top of that about why the type of environment we seek is, the best environment for all people. But it's very rare that anyone develops an ideology that is opposed to their self-interest. Right? Ideologies are simply extensions of our evolutionary makeup, where we try to recreate a world around us that is best suited for our own thriving. And then sometimes you may think the path to do that is through ethnic nationalism. Other times you say, oh, the best path to do this is through Christianity. And I'm in botanical gardens right now. So the ideologies may change, but what it comes down to is we all want to thrive, we all want to prosper, we all want more power rather than less, we all want more autonomy rather than less, right? We all want more safety rather than less. And so we may switch between various ideologies depending on how effective they are at promoting the world that we want within a certain situation. So looking out at the Sydney Harbour Bridge, looking out, you can see the Sydney Opera House in the distance as I sit here in the botanical gardens